Chapter 19. Trails. It was a different world when Bella woke up the next morning. Although she had taken off her ring and returned it to me with an uncomfortable half-smile, the fact still remained. Bella was going to be my wife. I hadn't deluded myself into thinking that she was as excited about it as I was, but I considered it a small victory that in her dreams at least, it seemed she wasn't entirely opposed to the idea. She had reluctantly fallen asleep as a storm raged outside, and within minutes she was muttering, "Won't understand," and "What do I say?" I smiled and ran my fingers through her hair, happy that I was finally starting to understand her fears. "It isn't about them, my love," I whispered, letting my lips gently touch her ear. She shivered, and I couldn't help but remember a time not so long ago when she slept without knowing I was with her. I'd barely dared to touch her skin for fear of waking her, and kept myself silent except for the occasional humming of her lullaby to ease her nightmares. Everything had changed the day she had let me into her life. Now, as I spoke softly, she hugged herself tightly to me and listened, even if only in her subconscious. "There's nothing else but you and me. I love you forever, and you've made me happier than I've ever thought possible. Don't worry, Bella. I'm going to spend the rest of my existence making sure you want for nothing." She sighed, a small twitching at her lips, and the words, "I love you," came so clearly I thought she had woken. Then she ducked her head into the crook of my arm and fell into a deeper sleep. It wasn't until the storm outside subsided and the faintest glimmer of sunlight hit the walls of my room that she spoke again. "I see you," she said softly, "waiting for me." I couldn't explain it. I had no reason to let myself hope, but I felt certain in that moment that she was dreaming of our wedding day. She sighed again and mumbled, "Too many flowers," and I laughed quietly, now even surer than before of what my Bella was dreaming. I had to play along, just for a few minutes. "My beautiful bride," I whispered. Even in her sleep, I felt her cringe at the word, but a few seconds later she relaxed again and nuzzled closer to me. "Not so bad," she breathed. Her chin lifted up toward me until I could see her eyelids fluttering. "Forever is good," was the last thing I heard before she fell silent again. I spent the rest of the morning staring at her with a smile on my face. When she awoke, squinting as she always did when there was light pouring in, I kissed each of her cheeks before touching my lips to hers. She giggled and laced her fingers together behind my neck. Somehow I felt younger, newer, like I had been given a fresh start. It was euphoria, and it was all because of her. I wished I could have reveled in the feeling for a while longer, but as the sun was replaced with clouds and the storm picked up again, I could feel her nerves creeping back in. "You probably need a few human minutes," I said lightly, and she nodded, her eyes not leaving mine. The way she was watching me was almost calculating, like she was trying to figure out some mystery. "I'll make you breakfast," I added, closing the door behind me and hoping some time alone would clear her thoughts. I stepped into the kitchen and began looking through the cupboards. Carlyle kept the house well stocked, not only for Bella, but to keep up appearances. He enjoyed shopping, explaining that it made him feel more normal, and there were many local food banks that were also kept in good supply, as he endlessly rotated items. He used to keep only the basics, but when Bella had started visiting more frequently, he began paying attention to her favorites. Now I found that I had a wide array of choices and didn't know where to begin. I must have still been staring at my options when I heard Bella's footsteps behind me. "You don't have to make me anything fancy. I'm happy with cereal." "I know I don't have to, but I want to. What would you like this morning?" She shrugged, smiling as she closed the distance between us. Then she stood on her tiptoes and pulled me down to kiss her. "You," she said, grinning as she released me. "I'm yours, always." I had said it with nothing but sincerity, but she inexplicably rolled her eyes. I might have questioned it, but instead I was just relieved that she appeared to be relaxed again. She tried to pour herself a bowl of cereal, but I stopped her and motioned for her to sit down. "I told you, I'm making breakfast, even if all you want is cereal." "Stubborn," she said, though she was smiling. You know, one of these days, I'm going to start watching the Food Network. I'll shock you by making something truly delicious. I can't wait. I brought the bowl to her, then toasted some bread. When I sat beside her, she twined her fingers with mine, and watched me with the same calculating expression. I didn't have the heart to ask what it was about. If she was worried about the fight, there was nothing more I could say to ease her mind. If she was doubting whether or not she wanted to marry me, I couldn't bear to hear it. So we sat there, hand in hand, her staring at me, and me trying to simply enjoy the moment for what it was, the first of many mornings spent together in our home. When my family was a few miles away, I began to hear their mental chatter. Carlyle was pleased with the trip, but wary of what now lay before us. Esme was her usual pensive self, concerned for her family, but wonderfully optimistic. Jasper and Emmett were anxious to start the fight, and Rosalie was ready for it to be over. It was Alice I heard last, and she seemed to be the only one not thinking about the fight. Knowing I would be listening, she was wasting no time voicing her disapproval.
"This is so unfair, and you know it. I only get to do this once, and you're trying to take it all away from me."
It only took me a few seconds to understand what she was referring to, and I didn't want to admit how much it hurt. Of course Alice would have seen Bella running off to Vegas, because that's the only way Bella could imagine actually marrying me. I knew it had been my suggestion, but I couldn't help but wishing for something a bit more traditional. Besides, it might not be for decades, or even centuries, but someday I believed Bella would wish we had had a real wedding.
"I have the perfect dress, and it's just going to go to waste."
The indignation in her tone momentarily pushed my disappointment aside. I almost laughed when I realized I wasn't sure whether or not Alice was talking about her dress or the one she had designed for Bella. However, Alice was under the impression that this wedding was about her. It almost made me want to run away to Vegas. "My family's almost home," I told Bella. Then I lifted her hand to my lips and kissed it. "I had a lovely evening with you. I can't wait for this to officially be your home, too." She smiled as a beautiful blush colored her cheeks, and I kissed her again. Time had passed too quickly, and I wasn't ready to let go of the peace we had found. The noise of the voices I always heard, as well as the ticking clock that reminded me how close we were to battle, felt deafening. I kissed Bella harder, trying to keep everything else out, but far too soon I had to let her go. When my family came through the door, their faces were sober, yet determined. Alice was the first one inside, and her eyes were seething.
"I didn't tell them yet. I thought it would be nice to be able to announce a real wedding, not this farce you two seem to be set on."
I rolled my eyes, trying my best to ignore her as the rest of my family joined us. "Welcome home," I said, in a tone that sounded too formal. "Thank you," Carlyle said. "We've prepared as best we can. There's nothing left to do now but wait." "Well, almost nothing," I reminded him. "Of course." He turned to Bella then, his voice gentle and kindness in his eyes. "It seems you have a bit of a hike ahead of you."
"From what I hear, I don't really have to worry about the hiking part. I'm more like along for the ride."
"Yes, that's probably true," he agreed, laughing lightly before turning back to me. "I take it you're all prepared?" "Just about. There are a few things we need to gather. Then we'll be meeting with Jacob." Alice scowled, wrinkling her nose.
"I think," she said, sneering, "that you're going to want to pack for cold weather, Edward. I can't see where you are exactly, because you're taking off with that dog this afternoon, but the storm that's coming seems to be particularly bad in that general area."
I nodded, figuring as much. The brief moments of sunlight this morning hadn't changed the fact that thick clouds were rolling in, and the wind wasn't letting up. It was going to be cold, and I knew no matter how prepared we were, it was going to be a miserable night for Bella.
"It's going to snow on the mountains," she added. "You better pack a first aid kit," she added silently.
It doesn't take a psychic to know that Bella, plus ice, will equal the need for bandages. I ignored Alice's snide remark, although I had packed the first aid kit. "Ew, snow," Bella said.
"Wear a jacket," Alice said coldly. "Don't worry, I won't try to pick it out for you or anything."
I tried to hide my smile of amusement, but Alice scowled at me. As long as she didn't say anything to Bella, I didn't mind hearing her internal irritation. Whatever Bella decided was fine. I would do my best to hide whatever disappointment I might feel if she did end up marrying me in Vegas, wearing jeans and a t-shirt. I wouldn't let her feel any more pressure than she already did. The next hour was spent finishing packing and making sure we were ready for the night ahead. I gathered all of our camping equipment that never got used, and tried to think of things that would help Bella stay warm through the impending storm. We had down sleeping bags and a few extra blankets. I suggested buying more at Newton's, but Bella assured me that we were already over-prepared. Her face crumpled in disgust as I put the dehydrated food in the backpack, but it made the most sense. I silently vowed to learn how to make her a gourmet meal when this was all over. Alice joined us in the garage and continued her mental tirade. I just kept packing, not wanting Bella to know anything was wrong.
"This is all your fault, really. You're the one insisting on getting married before you change her. She'll be so much happier when she's one of us. I'm sure she'd let me give her a proper wedding. And you say Bella is stubborn."
I continued ignoring Alice, content that she seemed more upset with me than with Bella. When I felt certain we had everything we needed, I handed Bella my phone. "Why don't you call Jacob and tell him we'll be ready for him in an hour or so? He knows where to meet us." Jacob wasn't home, but we both knew it wouldn't take long for Billy to get the message to him. The wolf's mental connection was an extremely useful tool. As Bella finished talking to Billy, I focused my attention on Alice. She was looking wistful, and from the little she was allowing me to hear, it sounded like she was practicing what she wanted to say to Bella to make her change her mind. "Alice," I growled quietly, my eyes darting toward Bella. She was too engrossed in her conversation to notice anything.
"What?"
Alice mouthed innocently.
"She deserves to know how I feel. I am her sister after all. Besides, I don't know what your problem is. You want a big, beautiful wedding, right? With your family there? Think of Carlisle and Esme. Bella probably hasn't even thought of all the people she'll be disappointing. Maybe if I can make her see that, we'll all get what we want."
"Everyone except Bella, that is." I looked at her, nothing but love and concern in her eyes as she talked to Billy. It didn't matter what I wanted, or what Alice wanted. If Bella wanted a 10-minute ceremony without anyone else present, that would be enough for me. More than enough. Because it would mean she was mine, and I was hers. I turned back to Alice, glaring, and shook my head. "Don't make her feel guilty," I whispered.
"I'm not. I'm just going to make sure she's thought through all her options."
I was about to argue further, but I felt Bella handing the phone back to me. "Billy said to tell you good luck," she said. That was generous of him. I gave Alice one last pleading look before I turned away, but she was wasting no time.
"Bella, could I please speak to you alone?"
she asked. "You're about to make my life harder than it needs to be, Alice. I'd rather you didn't."
"This isn't about you, Edward,"
she snapped, and I couldn't help but laugh. How foolish of me to think that my wedding was about me.
"It's not,"
Alice repeated.
"This is a female thing."
I glared at her, but Bella said, "Let her talk to me." "You asked for it," I said, shaking my head. As I walked past Alice, I muttered, "This is all on you now. I take no responsibility." She giggled and clapped her hands as I shut the door behind me. I probably should have let them talk in private, or as private as any conversation can be in our house, but I needed to hear Bella's response firsthand, rather than through Alice's thoughts. If she agreed to go along with Alice's elaborate plans, I wanted to make sure it was for the right reasons, and not because she was feeling guilty. She didn't know any one of us any more than the love and trust she had already shown time and time again. I waited outside while Alice said all the things I wished she wouldn't say.
"Don't you love me?"
she pleaded.
"Please, Bella, please. If you really love me, please let me do your wedding."
I almost ran back into the garage when I heard,
"I'll bet Edward would like it better if you did this traditionally, though he'd never tell you that."
But I couldn't make myself stop her. She was right, on both counts. It was what I wanted, and I wouldn't ever tell Bella how much it meant to me.
"Please,"
Alice repeated over and over. "I'll never, never ever forgive you for this, Alice," Bella said, defeated. Then through Alice's eyes, I saw the wedding Alice had been planning for so long, the dress she had designed for Bella, one that belonged in a different century, my century, and Bella, radiant and perfect, descending our staircase with flowers in her hair.
"Yay!"
Alice shouted, breaking me away from my vision too soon. That's not a yes, Bella argued.
But it will be, she chirped.
Edward, Bella yelled, and my momentary happiness at seeing everything I had longed for disappeared. I know you're listening. Get over here. The dismay I heard in her voice reminded me that she was my first priority. Her happiness was the only thing that mattered. Clearly Alice had no such concerns, as she clapped giddily behind Bella. Thanks so much, Alice, I said coldly. When Bella's eyes met mine, they were red and glassy, like she was nearly crying. How could Alice have kept pressuring her when it was upsetting her so much? Bella threw her arms around my neck and squeezed with all her strength. Vegas, I reminded her, wishing we had time to go right now, so all this would be done with.
Not a chance, Alice said. Bella would never do that to me. You know, Edward, as a brother, you are sometimes a disappointment.
Don't be mean, Bella chided. He's trying to make me happy, unlike you.
I'm trying to make you happy too, Bella. It's just that I know better what will make you happy in the long run. You'll thank me for this. Maybe not for 50 years, but definitely someday.
I never thought I'd see the day where I'd be willing to bet against you, Alice, but it has arrived. She laughed lightly, the whole situation amusing her now that she saw it going the way she wanted.
So are you going to show me the ring?
Before either Bella or I could stop her, she grabbed Bella's hand, scrutinizing the place where the ring should be, then dropped it.
Huh. I saw him put it on you. Did I miss something?
She closed her eyes for a moment, a sea of wedding images filling her mind once more. I tried to remind myself it wasn't what Bella wanted, but it was hard to believe when Alice could see it all so clearly. In every vision, Bella was positively beaming.
No, wedding's still on,
she said, her eyes focusing on Bella's empty ring finger again. Bella has issues with jewelry, I said casually, not wanting Bella to feel bad. She could wear it whenever she was ready.
What's one more diamond? Well, I guess the ring has lots of diamonds, but my point is that he's already got one on.
Enough, Alice, I snarled. From the corner of my eyes I could see Bella's mouth open in surprise. I couldn't tell whether it was because she understood what Alice had meant, or because of the way I snapped. I quickly regained composure and said quietly, "We're in a hurry."
I don't understand. What's this about diamonds?
Bella asked.
We'll talk about it later,
Alice said, and I shot her a glance that said, "We will not be talking about this later," which she promptly ignored.
Edward is right. You'd better get going. You've got to set a trap and make camp before the storm comes.
Though her thoughts were filled with uncertainty due to the wolf's presence, Alice began seeing visions of snow clouds rolling in. She saw Bella, shivering, miserable as she wrapped her arms around her chest. Of course there was nothing I could do for her. I was as icy as the snow that would be falling around her. The best I could do would be to pack for the weather, and get her inside the tent before the worst of the storm hit.
Don't forget your coat, Bella,
Alice told her, her eyes flickering to mine for a split second.
It seems unseasonably cold.
I've already got it, I promised.
Such a horrible night for her up there,
she thought dismally, though she smiled at Bella and told her,
"Have a nice night."
When Alice had left, Bella looked at me expectantly. "Are you ready for this?" she asked in a whisper. "As ready as I can be, given the circumstances. You'll be in the safest place possible, far away from the fight. But first, we need to make sure the newborns are crazy with your scent." "If that's all I can do to help," she said, looking down, almost embarrassed. "It's perfect. It's exactly what we need to make sure they follow the path we want them to." She smiled reluctantly and leaned out to pick up her backpack. Before her fingers could touch it, however, it was over my shoulder and she was in my arms. Her smile grew wider as she lifted her chin up to kiss me. A moment later we were flying through the trees. I took a different, longer route than our usual one, careful not to let her scent drift anywhere near the path she would be taking later. When we reached the clearing, I set her down, reveling for a moment in the way her fingers gripped my collar, not wanting to let go. I gave her a reassuring look as I released her, hoping she would know I would always rather keep her in my arms. "All right," I said. "Just walk north a ways, touching as much as you can. Alice gave me a clear picture of their path, and it won't take long for us to intersect it. North? She repeated, and I smiled as I motioned in the direction. She walked slowly and determinedly, touching trees and rocks and the grass, everything in her path. Every few steps she would glance in my direction, and I nodded encouragingly. I could already picture the frenzied eyes of the newborns when they caught the scent they had been obsessed with. I was proud of her strength, and her desire to do whatever possible to help, but still, it was difficult, almost painful, to think of the newborns tracking her that way. It reminded me too much of another tracker who had almost cost me my reason for existing.
"Am I doing this right?"
she asked, her hands tracing a path along the fallen, moss-covered trees. "Perfectly," I assured her. Her face lit up and she called, "Will this help?" Then I watched in fascination as she pulled out several of her hairs and left them trailing across a row of ferns. "Yes, that does make the trail stronger, but you don't need to pull your hair out, Bella. It will be fine."
"I've got a few extras I can spare," she said.
Her mood had gotten so much brighter, I didn't argue with her any further. Bella continued her slow walk through the bushes, tracing branches with her fingers and leaving hairs wherever she thought the wind wouldn't carry them away. Though I could tell she was still happy with the progress she was making and the help she was able to offer, something in her expression was off. Her eyes were distant and unfocused, and something told me it wasn't concern about the fight that was troubling her. "You don't need to let Alice have her way, you know," I offered, and the slight jump of her heart told me I had guessed right.
"Don't worry about it, Edward,"
she said, trying to sound nonchalant. "I'm not going to leave you at the altar regardless." "That's not what I'm worried about," I promised. "I want this to be what you want it to be." Bella took a deep breath, and I could hear the words she wouldn't utter. None of this was what she wanted, but as always, she would go along with whatever made everyone else happy. I wanted to tell her that the moment the fight was over, she and I could disappear. We would go somewhere, anywhere, as long as we were together. We could get married on some faraway island, and she wouldn't have to tell a soul. I wanted to make her happy, but I also wanted everything Alice had seen. I wanted Bella in a beautiful gown, with flowers in her hair and all around her. I wanted her parents to see her joy, because, although they would never know the magnitude of what choosing me, of choosing this life, meant, they should know that their daughter was marrying someone who loves her more than anything. I wanted them to know that I would always take care of her. I wanted Esme and Carlisle to witness the moment that Bella would officially join our family, and to welcome her with open arms. I wanted to shout to the world that, although I deserved none of it, I was getting everything I could ever ask for, and more. I wanted it all, but because I loved Bella more than my own life, I admitted none of it. "Well," I said, infusing my tone with as much casual indifference as I could muster, "even if she does get her way, we can keep it small, just us. Emmett could get a clerical license off the internet." She laughed, and I knew with even more certainty that the only thing I cared about was making her happy.
"That does sound better,"
she said. "See, there's always a compromise." I watched as she continued making a trail. It wasn't long before I could hear Jacob's thoughts in the distance. I was surprised to hear him thinking about the night ahead as much as I was. He was planning on staying with us, so he could communicate with the rest of the group, and Seth could take his place in the morning before the fight. I wasn't thrilled with the idea, but I was glad he was giving Seth a chance to rest for the night. I wanted Seth at his best tomorrow, since he was our only connection to the fight. Jacob wasn't far, and we would be at the clearing shortly. He was running in his wolf form, but he had decided to arrive human. Though he was surprised and delighted at the easy way Bella appeared to accept him in his wolf form, he had never gotten over the fear that he would scare her. He kept waiting for her to be frightened of the monster he was. I laughed under my breath, because for once I understood exactly how he felt. When we arrived at the place Alice saw as our most advantageous position for the fight, Bella made one last circle, touching everything in her path, and then we began the return trip. I tried to let Bella lead. Oddly enough, she seemed almost to enjoy herself, but a few times I could tell she was feeling lost. Once she saw the place where we had begun our journey, her pace sped up, and I was about to remind her to be careful, but I was too late. Before I had time to catch her, Bella was in a heap on the ground. I smelled her blood instantly. "Ouch," she called out, then mumbled, "Oh, fabulous." "Are you all right?" I asked without moving. It only took a moment to realize that I was hesitating more out of habit than any other reason, and I felt a wave of relief.
"I'm fine. Stay where you are,"
she answered quickly.
"I'm bleeding. It will stop in a minute."
I felt triumphant as I flew to her side, grateful that I could finally help her without having to hold my breath and shy away. "I've got a first aid kit," I told her, reaching into my backpack. I had a feeling I might need it.
"It's not bad. I can take care of it. You don't have to make yourself uncomfortable."
"I'm not uncomfortable," I promised, ecstatic that it was the truth. "Here, let me clean it."
"Wait a second. I've got another idea,"
she said, her eyes lighting up with a strange excitement as she pressed her bleeding palm against a rock. "What are you doing?"
"Jasper will love this,"
she said, hurriedly touching everything she could.
"I'll bet this really gets them going."
She misread my sigh and looked at me apologetically.
"Hold your breath,"
she suggested. "I'm fine. I just think you're going overboard."
"This is all I get to do. I want to do a good job."
I remembered with far too much clarity how quickly Jasper had lost control when she had only shed a few small drops of blood. This much was sure to leave those newborns crazed and unable to think about anything else but finding her, which made me a little apprehensive. Though I hated how she would be getting there, I was grateful in that moment that Jacob's stench would be covering her trail to our location. "Well, you have," I told her, attempting a smile. "The newborns will be frantic, and Jasper will be very impressed with your dedication. Now let me treat your hand. You've gotten the cut dirty."
"Let me do it, please."
I smiled as I took her hand, and felt a surge of pride as I was able to say with total confidence, "This doesn't bother me any more." She watched me quizzically as I tended to her wound, and I felt my grin widen. I knew my instinct to protect her had grown exponentially stronger after I thought I had lost her, and I found that in the times when I did feel some twinge of bloodlust, it was almost immediately replaced with a fear that I would do something to hurt her. I had felt how greatly things had changed, yet in this circumstance, with her all but flaunting her blood, which still sang to me like no other, it was a very satisfying feeling to know that there was no hint of temptation. Her palm was clean, and I was finishing wrapping a bandage around it when she finally asked,
"Why not?"
Not sure how best to describe it. After all, it should be an impossibility. I simply shrugged. "I got over it."
"You got over it?" she gasped. "When? How?"
As much as I hated to think about that dark day, the longest of my endless life, I owed her the best explanation I could manage. I thought back to how it had felt, the moment when I had first learned what Alice had seen, and then when Jacob had said the words that seemingly confirmed my worst fears. I felt almost numb as I remembered how my vision had clouded and my heart sank. There was an emptiness within me I had never felt, and I could think of nothing other than, I can't exist without her. When she had come to me again, when she had saved me in every way, it was almost enough to make me believe I still had a soul. Something far beyond my body or mind was reaching out to her, embracing her. I felt a shift in the essence of my being, and it changed everything about the way I viewed the world. I had been granted a reprieve, a second chance I shouldn't have been allowed, and what came of it was more than simply making another vow to protect Bella. All of the deplorable instincts I had fought for so long shut down. I was thirstier than I'd ever been, having nearly starved myself in the weeks before, yet I felt no ache or burn when she was wrapped in my arms. There was only joy, and when the burn did return, as it always must, I silenced it with a vehemence that came somewhere in my subconscious. My need to protect her from everything, including myself, had taken on a life of its own. I had lived through an entire 24 hours thinking you were dead, Bella. That changed the way I look at a lot of things.
"Did it change the way I smell to you?"
she asked, still confused. "Not at all. But, having experienced the way it feels to think I've lost you, my reactions have changed. My entire being shies away from any course that could inspire that kind of pain again." I wasn't sure if I was explaining it right. but her expression conveyed something close to gratitude. Truly I was grateful above anything else, so I hoped that meant she understood. I guess you could call it a very educational experience. She looked like she wanted to say more, but the wind picked up, and I saw her shiver. I retrieved her jacket and helped her into it. "All right, you've done your part. Now it's out of our hands. Let's go camping." She laughed at my sarcasm, and I gently took her hand in mine, wishing we had just a few more minutes together before I had to leave her in Jacob's care. I had been carefully tuning him out since I had first heard him approach, but at the sight of us together his inner monologue grew too loud for me to ignore. "For him thinking he's such a great protector, she sure does get hurt a lot," he thought icily, staring at her bandaged hand.
"Where are we meeting Jacob?"
Bella asked, not having spotted him yet. "Right here." Jacob stepped slowly out from the trees until he was in full view. "Don't know why I bothered," he thought, irritated as he bunched up the jacket he carried. "Of course the psychic knew it was going to be cold. Should have just left it in the forest." It would never cease to amaze me, Jacob's ability to get caught up in such petty things as whose jacket Bella would wear, when there were so many more important things going on. His juvenile concerns didn't make me feel more confident about the important task he was about to take on. There had to have been a better way to do this.
"Too late now,"
Bella sighed, squeezing my hand. Then she put on her best smile, one that I recognized as taking a great deal of effort.
"Hey, Jake,"
she said casually. "Hi, Bella." "Hello, Jacob," I said calmly. "Yeah, whatever. Where do I take her?" I took out the map showing our destination and handed it to Jacob. "We are here now," I said, gesturing to our location. Jacob recoiled, staring at my hand in disgust, like vampirism was a disease he could catch. I didn't give him the satisfaction of a response. "And you're taking her up here," I explained, tracing the route to the top. "Roughly 9 miles. Outwardly, Jacob nodded, a picture of compliance. But I could hear fleeting thoughts of taking Bella somewhere else entirely, so he could protect her. If it weren't for his compulsive need to fight and destroy, I might have worried he would act on that notion. "When you're about a mile away, you should cross my path. That will lead you in. Do you need the map?" Jacob glanced at me for a split second, and I knew he could tell by my tone that I had heard what he was considering. "No thanks," he said flatly. "I know this area pretty well. I think I know where I'm going. I'm not going to kidnap her. I wouldn't miss this fight for anything. I'll take a longer route, and I'll see you in a few hours." Then I turned to Bella and tried to find the courage to leave. I didn't want her with Jacob, even knowing he would bring her to me safely. Our enemies were so close now. It seemed wrong for us not to be together.
"See you,"
she said softly, and I knew I had no choice. We needed Jacob's stench to cover the trail. I left without another word, fearing that I might say something that would make Bella feel badly. This was our only option, and I wouldn't let her worry about how much it was upsetting me. I ran as fast as I could, determined not to listen in on their conversation. As I struggled to keep everything around me out, I started to laugh. This must be what Alice feels like when she tries to block me from reading her mind. When I was far enough away, I let my thoughts clear and was happy to find my mind silent. I tried to enjoy it, but the quiet didn't feel nearly as peaceful as it had the night before, when Bella was beside me. Now the sounds of the trees rustling and the wind around me just reminded me that I was alone. It was amazing how much the world had changed since finding Bella. There was a time when I would have given anything to retreat into a silent sanctuary like that, to get away from the chatter and eternal angst of everyone around me. Now, all I wanted was to be with Bella, and wherever she wanted us to spend our life, whatever she wanted to do, that was fine. I would go to Alaska to help her avoid temptation. I would endure decade after decade of repeating high school or college, or anything else that made her happy. Though I had to admit, a few years alone together in some remote location, away from humans, and even my family, simply away, that had possibilities. It was dangerous to let my imagination get away from me when there was so much at stake over the next 24 hours. I continued in my hurried pace until I reached the place where we would be setting up camp. The chill in the air was getting harder to ignore, and as the wind started to pick up, I could see snow beginning to fall. I set up the tent, then secured it until I was certain wild grizzlies couldn't knock it down. Perhaps I had gone a bit overboard, but only time would tell how violent the elements would be tonight, and I preferred to err on the side of caution. In my struggle not to think about where Jacob and Bella were and what they were talking about, I let my thoughts drift somewhere I had purposely been ignoring: the fight. My family wasn't upset by my decision to stay with Bella, and they were no less certain of a victory than when I had been planning to fight with them. Still, it didn't make the choice any easier. Although I felt confident things would all go as planned, there was something nagging at the back of my mind, almost as if we were missing something extraordinarily obvious that would change everything. Perhaps it was the simple fact that, while I was grateful for the connection Seth would be able to give us to the rest of the pack, I never imagined I'd be watching the fight helplessly through the eyes of a wolf. I didn't know how long I had let my mind wander, but sooner than I expected, I could hear Jacob's thoughts. "Just give it a rest, Bella. Please, not now. This is not something I wanted to talk about today." I had made such an effort not to listen in, but curiosity started to get the better of me. I had to know what Bella was discussing that had made him so frustrated.
"Well, if it's about lineage, shouldn't you be the chief then?"
Bella was asking. Jacob then proceeded to talk around the fact that he had, in fact, shirked responsibility, and let Sam take his place as leader of the pack. I supposed I had no right to judge. It was a huge responsibility, one I'm not sure I would ever have stepped up to. I often thought about what Carlyle did for our family, the decisions he made, and I didn't know whether I would have that kind of strength. Sam had many of the same obligations, teaching the new wolves what he knew and helping them transition. He also had the overwhelming responsibility of making certain orders irrefutable. It would have been a difficult thing to do, deciding when it was best to command with that kind of authority, not to leave anything to chance. I tried to ignore the remainder of Bella and Jacob's conversation, but it was impossible not to hear the air of wonderment in Bella's voice when she tried out the words, "Chief Jacob." I busied myself with checking the tent for probably the dozenth time, then took to pacing. There was nothing left for me to do, and the snow was blustering around me. All I could think of was getting Bella under shelter. Just when I thought I wouldn't be able to stand the weight any longer, I heard Jacob's footsteps. "Bella," I cried when they stepped into sight, and I flew to her side. Jacob muttered something, his thoughts even more impolite than what he was letting show on his face, but I couldn't bring myself to care. My arms wound tightly around Bella, and the world was right again. "Thank you," I said, looking at Jacob, unable to feel anything but gratitude. "That was quicker than I expected, and I truly appreciate it." "It wasn't for your benefit," he thought, shrugging absently. "Get her inside. This is going to be bad. My hair's standing up on my scalp. Is that tent secure?" "All but welded to the rock." "Good." The tension was thick as we stared at each other, the silence becoming deafening, and I wondered if Bella would be the one to break it. Jacob's fist clenched and unclenched. The seething odium simmered just under the surface of his calm facade. "I'm going to change," he snapped, turning his head to the forest. "I want to know what's going on back home." I suppressed a growl at the realization that Jacob would not be leaving as I had expected. I fully anticipated spending the evening alone with Bella, being joined by Seth in the morning before the battle. The thought of enduring Jacob's thoughts for 12 hours or more made my stomach churn. Bella watched after him as he disappeared into the forest, her shoulders slumping slightly as he went out of sight. I reached up, gently stroking her face, regaining her attention. She smiled weakly up at me, and I leaned in to kiss her forehead. The wind whipped her hair around her face, and she blinked the swirling ice crystals out of her eyes. "Let's get you inside," I offered, pulling her toward the small tent. I unzipped the entrance, revealing a down sleeping bag. She shivered lightly as she climbed through the small opening and lowered herself onto the sleeping bag, pulling her legs up underneath her. "How was your afternoon?" I asked, easing myself down to the ground beside her.
fine," she grumbled. I reached up for her hand, and her eyes slowly drifted up to mine. "What's the matter?" I asked. She shook her head indifferently.
"Just worried, that's all."
That made two of us. Not only did I have the battle weighing heavily on my mind, we were now fixed on the side of a mountain in what was shaping up to be a considerable snowstorm. I reached a tentative hand to lightly stroke her cheek. Her skin flushed as she leaned into my touch.
"I missed you," she whispered.
"I missed you." I could feel the temperature around us begin to drop, and the moist vapor from Bella's breath seemed to crystallize in mid-air. "Why don't you bundle up?" I suggested. "It's getting colder." She nodded in agreement and stood, unzipping the sleeping bag and climbing inside. She cocooned herself in the soft down, pulling the zipper up around her. "You look like a caterpillar settling into its chrysalis," I teased.
"Maybe I'll turn into a butterfly by morning."
"No need," I smiled, laying down beside her. "You're already beautiful." She rolled her eyes and chuckled softly, leaning her head against my arm. We lay in silence, listening to the whistle of the wind outside as it battered the tent. I hadn't heard anything from Jacob in quite some time. Not that I was complaining, but I was beginning to wonder what had become of him. Bella began to shiver, and I rubbed her arms in an effort to create some heat by means of friction. The temperature continued to free-fall, and there was little I could do to make her warm. I was beginning to worry that my presence in the tent was only making things worse for her, that the coolness of my skin was somehow making her colder, drawing the heat out of her. She pursed her lips as I scooted to the edge of the tent. "I'm making it worse," I muttered. She burrowed herself deeper into the sleeping bag, reluctantly accepting that I was correct in my assessment. Outside the tent, I could hear the soft padding of paws drawing closer. "It's getting pretty bad out here," Jacob thought, exhaling loudly and lowering himself to the ground next to the tent. Through his eyes I could see the blanket of white already forming on the mountainside. More time passed, and with each minute the temperature seemed to cool even further. Bella's shivering intensified, the down sleeping bag doing little to keep out the chill. How much colder could it get? I wished Alice had been able to give us a more accurate prediction of the weather. I wished that in all my family's collection of camping gear there had been some heat-producing device. We had never thought to purchase such a thing, given that we were never cold. "Bella?" She looked up at me, struggling to focus between bouts of shuddering.
Yes?"
she asked. "I'm beginning to think this was a bad idea," I began. "Wow, genius, when did you figure that out?" "Maybe we should think about getting you somewhere warmer," I suggested. She shook her head. It was a little difficult to discern whether she was shaking her head or merely shivering.
"I'm better in here. It's worse outside."
"I'll carry you," I offered. "I could run you to my house. You're freezing, Bella."
No,"
she shook her head again.
"If we leave, what was the point? All that work for nothing."
"The trail will still be there," I assured her. "Your trail will still lead the newborns right where we want them. But right now, I'm concerned with your health. It's too cold for you."
I don't want to go outside,"
she insisted, burying her face in the sleeping bag once again. "Now what?" Jacob thought. "I don't know," I whispered. I focused my attention on Bella, the rhythm of her heartbeat, the temperature of her skin, the intensity of her trembling. I was becoming concerned that if we didn't do something soon to make her warm, hypothermia would begin to set in. More time passed and things only seemed to get worse. "Bella, please let me take you somewhere to get warm," I pleaded.
No,"
she shuddered.
"No time to get back before the battle."
"We can make it back. Alice will."
"No,"
she cut me off.
What if the storm only gets worse?"
I squeezed my eyes shut, searching my brain for a solution, but coming up short. She was right. There was no guarantee that the storm would lessen overnight, and if the pace of the snowfall continued, it would make it difficult to get back in time, not to mention the concern that a stray newborn could follow the footprints that were left in the snow. I was at a complete loss. I hated watching Bella suffer, but there was nothing I could do for her. I pressed myself as close to the tent wall as possible, even going as far as holding my breath, worried that even it could be partially blamed for her shivering. Hours passed and the situation only deteriorated. No matter how I begged and pleaded, Bella was steadfast in her position not to leave the tent. Although she had asked Jacob several times to go somewhere warmer for himself, it didn't matter how cold she was still worried about him. I had half a mind to stop asking and just take her against her will. She might be angry with me, but at least she would be warm. The only sound louder than the raging wind was the clanking sound of Bella's chattering teeth. It may as well have been a jackhammer for the pain the sound caused me. I clamped my fist over my ears in an effort to block out the sound. What time is it?" Bella asked, her head not leaving the cocoon of the sleeping bag. "Time to take her out of here." 2. "Just grab her and go. What are you waiting for?" "Maybe," I began, but Bella cut me off. "No, I'm fine. Really. I don't want to go outside." "What can I do?" I pleaded, desperate for anything that would help ease her misery. Our window of escape had all but disappeared as the snow piled up around us and the wind howled relentlessly. "She's so stubborn," Jacob whined outside. Get out of here," she called to him. "He's just worried about you," I explained. "He's fine. His body's equipped to deal with this." How?" she stammered. "This is ridiculous. Do something." "What do you want me to do?" I growled, frustrated with my own impotence and Jacob's continued criticism of how I was handling the situation. "Carry her out through that? I don't see you making yourself useful. Why don't you fetch a space heater or something?" "I'm okay," she insisted. Judging by the howl outside the tent, Jacob and I had finally agreed on something for once. Bella was far from okay. Her shivering had amplified almost to the point of convulsions, and the pallor of her skin was beginning to take on a bluish hue. "All right, that's it." Jacob let out a grisly howl of frustration, signaling the rest of his pack. "Seth, get your tail up here and keep watch. I'm going in there." "Aw, man, come on. In the snow?" "Don't make me call Sam," he threatened. Bella's hands clamped over her ears. "That was hardly necessary," I growled. I turned my head to the side of the tent, speaking directly to Jacob. "And that's the worst idea I've ever heard." "Better than anything you've come up with," he sneered, as Seth's answering howl could be heard faintly over the roaring winds. "Go fetch a space heater. I'm not a St. Bernard." The zippered entrance to the tent crackled as the ice crystals that had formed there were forced away. Jacob appeared in the opening, wearing nothing but a pair of pants, his coat draped over his shoulder. A gust of wind blew past him and into the tent, sending Bella into another fit of shivers. He quickly worked his way through the small opening and closed it behind him, locking us in together in the tiny enclosed space. His stench assaulted my nose, quickly overwhelming our small respite from the storm. "See, it's warmer already," he smirked. "I don't like this," I hissed through my teeth. "Just give her the coat and get out." What? Bella stammered. "The parka's for tomorrow. She's too cold to warm it up by herself. It's frozen." He held out the snow-covered coat and dropped it unceremoniously to the ground. "You said she needed a space heater, and here I am." He stretched out his arms, smirking smugly. I felt completely helpless, utterly useless, and I was having a very difficult time coming to terms with the fact that I was going to have to rely on the dog for help.
Jake,
Bella shuddered.
"You'll freeze."
"Not me," he boasted, crossing his arms over his chest. "I run at a toasty 108.9 these days. I'll have you sweating in no time." He smirked at the double meaning of his words. He moved toward Bella, kneeling down beside her. My jaw clenched as his hand reached for the zipper of her sleeping bag, and I couldn't help it. It was an automatic reaction to his encroachment on her personal space. My hand shot out, bracing against his massive shoulder. I heard the audible snap of his teeth clench, the tiny vibrations in his skin already beginning. "Get your hands off me," he growled. "Keep your hands off her," I countered.
Don't fight,"
Bella sputtered.
We stared at each other for several beats. It may as well have been an eternity. No matter how much time passed, Jacob and I would never see eye to eye on anything, much less Bella. "I'm sure she'll thank you for this when her toes turn black and drop off," he snapped. "Seriously, get over it. If you weren't already so cold, I'd tell you to chill out." I recoiled at his words, a verbal slap in the face, actuating the fact that there was nothing I could do to help her in this instant, and I had no choice but to rely on him. He continued unzipping the sleeping bag, exposing Bella's shivering form. "Watch yourself," I warned. "Jealous," he chuckled. "Scoot over, Bella." Her eyes widened and her head spun around to face him, her icy hands ineffectually trying to hold him back. It was the strongest reaction I had seen from her since we had entered the tent. No, she tried to argue. "Don't be stupid." Jacob rolled his eyes. "Don't you like having 10 toes?" He rezipped the sleeping bag, wrapping his arms around Bella, my Bella. Jealousy coursed through my veins as I watched helplessly. She was stiff in his arms, displeased with the turn of events, but I could see her body gradually beginning to relax against the warmth of his skin. Another hour and she would have... She's so cold. Whose idea was this again? I wanted to remind him that it was his idea to bring Bella to the mountainside, but I held my tongue, not wanting to antagonize him when he was so dangerously close to her. "Geez, you're freezing, Bella."
Sorry.
"Try to relax," he soothed, as she shivered uncontrollably. "You'll be warm in a minute. Of course, you'd warm up faster if you took off your clothes." I growled reflexively at the suggestion, wanting nothing more than to throw the mongrel back out into the snow. I would carry her down the mountain by force if necessary. "Does that bother you? Do you think she'd want something more from me than warmth?" "Just a simple fact. Survival 101.
Cut it out, Jake,"
Bella chastised.
Nobody really needs all 10 toes.
I breathed a sigh of relief that Bella hadn't agreed to the suggestion, and it was clear that she wasn't completely oblivious to Jacob's taunting. "Don't worry about the bloodsucker. He's just jealous." "Of course I am," I whispered. "You don't have the faintest idea how much I wish I could do what you're doing for her, mongrel." "Those are the breaks." Jacob shrugged before his face became serious. "At least you know she wishes it was you." It was the first time I had seen any measure of defeat in his eyes. He was always so certain, so confident in his ability to dissuade her. There was a sorrow he kept deeply hidden that slowly began to surface. True. Bella's shivering gradually began to subside, and I watched in dismay as she began to press herself more tightly against him, seeking his warmth, and sighing in contentment. "There, feel better?" Jacob asked.
"Yes,"
she smiled. "Your lips are still blue," he observed. "Want me to warm those up for you too? You only have to ask." He shot me a sideways glance. "Those were the terms we agreed on, correct?" I let out an exasperated sigh, running my fingers through my already tangled mop of hair.
"Behave yourself,"
Bella reproved as she leaned her face into his shoulder, warming her lips on his skin rather than accepting his offer to kiss her. We sat in uncomfortable silence. I ground my teeth together as I listened to Jacob's thoughts. His pleasure at taking this opportunity to be close to Bella and flaunt it in my face was beginning to wear on me.
"Jake,"
Bella murmured.
"can I ask you something? I'm not trying to be a jerk or anything. I'm honestly curious."
"This should be good." "Sure," he chuckled.
"Why are you so much furrier than your friends? You don't have to answer if I'm being rude."
"That's the big question." "Because my hair is longer," he answered matter-of-factly as he shook his head.
"Oh,"
she breathed, biting her lip as she thought.
"Then why don't you cut it? Do you like it to be shaggy?"
"Things weren't the same between us after I cut my hair. After I became, I wanted to go back to that." I chuckled at the absurdity of his thoughts. Like any typical youth, he was doing it to impress a girl. My girl. He would need more than long hair to win her over. "Why can't you stay out of my head?"
"Sorry," she whispered. "I didn't mean to pry. You don't have to tell me."
"Oh, he'll tell you anyway," he scoffed, narrowing his eyes at me. "So I might as well. I was growing out my hair because it seemed like you like it better long. Oh, she cringed. I like it both ways, Jake. You don't need to be inconvenienced. Turns out it's very convenient tonight, so don't worry about it. She nodded and closed her eyes, slowly drifting off to sleep. I listened as her heartbeat began to decline to a slow, steady rhythm. That's right, honey. Go to sleep, Jacob crooned. Outside I could hear the crunching of snow under heavy paws. This better be good, Seth grumbled as he lowered himself next to the tent, squinting against the harsh winds. Seth is here, I murmured. Perfect, he smiled. Now you can keep an eye on everything else while I take care of your girlfriend for you. Fiancé, I wanted to shout at him. I clenched my fist, refusing to allow him to get to me. No, I was the better man, and I would prove it. Stop it, Bella mumbled sleepily. I turned my head and looked at the floor. The ring in my pocket felt like a block of ice, like a lead weight pulling me down. I thought about how weightless I would feel without it, with the ring out of my pocket and back where it belonged, on Bella's hand. I smiled with smug satisfaction as I imagined the look on Jacob's face when he finally knew the truth. So warm, so soft. I watched in horror as Jacob's thoughts took a very intimate turn. The things he imagined with Bella were enough to make even me blush, and I could feel my temper begin to slip away from me. I tried to focus on something else, anything else. I listened to the howling wind. I listened to the quiet dreams of Seth as he slept outside the tent. I tried to imagine a dream of my own, but nothing could shut out the offensive onslaught of thoughts from the dog who had his thoughts and his body all over my girl, his hands on her arms, his lips on hers, trailing kisses down her neck, his hands spanning the bare skin of her back as she hummed in pleasure. Oh, Bella. Please, I hissed. Do you mind? What? He shot back. Do you think you could attempt to control your thoughts? I growled, unable to rein in my temper any longer. No one said you had to listen, he smirked. Get out of my head. I wish I could, I muttered. You have no idea how loud your little fantasies are. It's like you're shouting them at me. He rolled his eyes, seeming to find a little too much pleasure in my suffering. I'll try to keep it down. That bothers you, doesn't it? That I could be with her like that, and you can't? It requires no effort or restraint from me. That I could be intimate with her without needing to worry about harming her. Was that a rhetorical question? Yes, I whispered. I'm jealous of that too. I had promised Bella we would try, that we would make an attempt at a proper honeymoon, but I couldn't deny Jacob was right. Every moment of intimacy with Bella would be tainted by worry and strain. I figured it was something like that. Sort of evens the playing field a little, doesn't it? In your dreams, I scoffed. You know, she could still change her mind, considering all the things I could do for her that you can't, at least not without killing her, that is. I watched as his vision of their future played out, married under a canopy of evergreens, making love by a roaring fire, chasing small children through a grassy field. There was so much he could give her that I could not, so much I longed for her to have, but I was far too selfish to give her up. That would have to be her choice. Go to sleep, Jacob. You're starting to get on my nerves. I think I will, he snickered. I'm really very comfortable.